I think it's very hard. I wouldn't even like to use the word hesped because I am not worthy of being maspid, such a giant. But every word we say is part of trying to solidify the enormous Masechta called the Masechta of Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. And in a certain way, I think this just talks by itself. The fact that we're now talking here to Jacksonville, Florida, it just simply reminds me of how the Gemara describes Rabbi Yehuda in Nitzivim, At ben Nitzivim tzudascha prusa b'Yerushalayim. That he was in one place and his net spread literally across the globe. And it's quite an astonishing thing. And I think this is itself talks worlds, that a person who never had a position in his life, he was never Rosh Yeshiva, he was never Rosh Kollel, he was never the Av Bezdin, he didn't even sit in the front of the shul, and just simply sat and learned Torah Lishma like his father and like his uncle for decades and decades and decades, Yom V'Layla, and somehow or other, like a spiritual magnetic force, the whole of Klal Yisrael somehow or other made their way to Rehov Rashbam number 23. And this is probably the greatest testimony that this was the Gadol Hador. I once heard a comment that, how do we know who the Gadol Hador is? Everybody will claim that their Rebbe is the Gadol Hador. So one of the ways to prove this, or not that we're in a competition here, but the litmus test always is, who's the second? So obviously, if you'll ask a Gera Chassid or a Vishnitzer Chassid or a Satmar Chassid, they'll all tell you that their Rebbe is the number one. But ask them, who's the second? When you know who the second is, you know who the first is. And that's the way it is. Everybody, literally across the entire Jewish spectrum, appreciated and was aware of who this incredible giant was. And as I say, the mere fact that we're talking across the world about this person just says it all. There's a story they say that it's known Rav Yitzchak Hutner was a tremendous, for lack of a better word, a tremendous fan of the Chazon Ish. He really was in such awe of him. Not that he met him that many times, but he was in awe of the Chazon Ish. And they say that on one occasion when Rav Hutner arrived in Eretz Yisrael, he went straight from the airport, early in the morning, straight to the Beis HaKvaros here in Bnei Brak, to the Kev of the Chazon Ish. And as he was making his way in and out of the roads, Rashbam and all these roads around here, around the corner from me where I'm sitting now, he noticed very early in the morning, a number of Yidden were learning outside on the Mepeset, on the balcony of their homes. And Rav Hutner commented something very powerful. And he said, Chazal say, Kol ha'loimet Torah b'seisa, anybody who learns Torah secretly and privately, when no one knows and no one sees, eventually it's going to express itself externally. It will become publicized eventually. And he said that all these people who are learning outside their apartments on the balconies is an expression of the secret hidden Torah of the Chazon Ish, who was constantly learning secretly within the Daled Amos of his own private home. And so to speak, that secret Torah is now expressing itself and spilling out beyond the privacy of his home onto the balconies of the entire Bnei Brak. And again, whatever we know about someone like Reb Chaim Kanievsky, we must always remember this. It's the little bit that he managed or didn't manage to hide from us. Lahavdil elef alfei avdolas. If we compare, not that we can compare for even a second, but if you think about any president or any prime minister that is running for office. So basically, anyone who's running for office is going to be spending all day, every day, telling you how brilliant he is, how smart he is, his achievements, his accomplishments, and the rest of the time telling you what an absolute good for nothing the other person is who's running against him, building himself by pushing someone else down, and just constantly ranting and raving about himself. And eventually, after his years in office, when eventually he's either outvoted or whatever it is, he has to resign, whatever the case may be, he then will actually go and sit and spend days and hours writing his own biography because nobody else will. So he'll write an enormous biography that you should never forget how amazing and brilliant he was. Ra'u ma bein beni leben chami. Look what a completely different world this is. When we talk about these kind of Gedolei Yisrael, when we talk about someone like Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, talk about himself, rant and rave about himself, write his own biography, these incredible people with their brilliant minds spent their entire lives hiding from us. They spent their entire lives avoiding public attention and avoiding people thinking they were great. Nebuch, they couldn't hide everything. So whatever we know is what Nebuch, they couldn't hide. But do we have any hasaga? Do we have any knowledge of really what was going on there? What was really going on there in the privacy of his home when no one was around? Do we know how many things happened that we don't know? Can we imagine what went on in the inner chambers of his holy brain? We've got no idea. Again, whatever we know, which itself speaks volumes, and volumes have been written, is merely Nebuch, what he tried so hard to hide from us and didn't manage. So really, it reminds me of the words of the Sfas Emes, when Chazal say, Masa yagia maisai lemaisa avoisai. When will my actions be able to reach the actions of the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Says the Sfas Emes, we could live for a millennia and never reach Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But yagia, says the Sfas Emes, doesn't mean to reach. It means miloshan lagas, to touch. When we will be able to touch upon the qualities of the Avos in the Imais, that we can talk about, touching. But when we start talking about these unbelievable madrigas and these spectacular stories, and they're just gushing forth these days, the stories are just coming out one after the other. And there's always a danger that when we hear these kind of stories, which are so spectacular, and these kind of madrigas, which are so superior, there's always the danger that we'll sort of back off and say, well, he was a malach, I'm a human being, and there's no shaykhs to me from all this. But that would be a mistake. Yes, the chances of us getting to those kind of madrigas, the chances of us being able to finish Kol HaTorah literally every single Erev Pesach is, again, for me, it's not possible. I mean, I'm sure the Jacksonville Kollel is a very chashuv moised. I'm not here to speak about whether you finish Kol HaTorah every single year, meaning Shas Bavli, Yerushalmi, every medrash ever written in the whole of Tanakh. But it's rare to find that anyone can do that kind of thing. And all the madrigas and all the unbelievable things. But by no means should this cause us to sort of back off and say, well, this is just beyond me. He was a Stipler's son, the Chaznish's nephew, and I'm a simple guy. We have to do whatever we can to try and touch on this incredible Masechta. The Masechta called Masechtas Rabbeinu HaGadol Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. One of the Magidim here, Leventhal, said a beautiful mashal. He said, what is everyone so shocked about? I mean, he was 94 years old. He wasn't well for the last few months. He was weakening. And eventually, the candle goes out. Why is the whole world so dumbstruck? There's like not just a tsar, there seems to even be a shock that this has happened. Everyone seems to be in a state of shock. And he gave a very beautiful mashal to describe the inner feelings of Klal Yisrael, basically, these days. A mashal of a dark, dense forest. And in this dark, dense forest, there was a person who was standing there with a big candle. And this person, let's call him a tzaddik, was standing there with a candle. And because of his light, everybody else could see. And because of his bright light, everyone else could come close and find their way because of the light of this person. And eventually, the candle went out. And when the candle went out, everyone was so shocked. So someone turns to someone else and said, what are you so shocked about? You know it was a 24-hour candle. It says on the candle, 24 hours. You know eventually candles do go out. To which the person answered, you're right. We knew eventually the candle would go out. We had no question about that. No one is immortal. Eventually the candle goes out. But what we're so shocked and upset about is that we thought we'd be out of the forest. We thought that this tzaddik with this bright light would at least guide us to the point that we can see the end of the forest at least, or be out of the forest at least. But we were literally dumbstruck by the fact that this giant was plucked from us, just like his Rebbetzin, without enough time to do anything about it. Klal Yisrael didn't have a moment to daven and try and pierce the heavens, thundering tefillahs, to try and prevent this. But just like his Rebbetzin, so he were plucked and taken before we could do anything about it. And we're still in the forest. We're still in the dense forest. Apparently, Hashem wants us to keep walking by ourselves and turn to him and solidify the lessons of the one who was holding the candle, at least, to help us take those steps by ourselves. Zeh sefer told us Adam, the pasuk says, a person is a sefer. A person is a masechta. I had a choshev uncle who once pointed out very fascinatingly that the kaddish that we say, Lo Aleinu by Levaya, is the same kaddish we say after a masechta has been finished in Shas. Because symbolically, every person is a masechta. A long masechta, a detailed masechta, an intricate masechta. And when eventually the masechta is finished, we are Messiah with Yiskada of Yiskada Shemir Rabba. When the masechta of a person's life is finished, we also are Messiah with Yiskada of Yiskada Shemir Rabba. And the same long Kaddish is said for both. Zeh Sefer told us Adam. We are here trying to touch upon, trying to have some shaykhs to this most incredible Masechta. A long, long Masechta of 94 years. And wow, were there so many perushim to this Sefer. So many details, so many secrets, so many deep, analytical, fantastic concepts that were attached to this fantastic Masechta. And we want to try and have a little bit of an understanding, a little bit of touch, something about this Masechta. This was an incredible Masechta of someone who
Rabbi Cohen, I think you muted yourself by mistake.
Hello?
Yeah, we hear you now.
Oh, yeah. What's the last word I said? I don't remember. Yeah.
Just a few seconds. Just a few seconds.
Okay, fine.
Rabbi Cohen, you were speaking about the Masechta.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay. So as I was saying, this long 94 years Masechta, so intricate, so deep, is a Masechta we need to try and learn, not just B'Kiyas, but B'Iyan. And it was a Masechta of 94 years of doing everything as it's supposed to be done, in the most ideal way it's supposed to be done. And as we say in Yiddish, without any nerven. That was an astonishing thing. There were no tense reactions or behavior from him. I can honestly say, I can testify, having been in close proximity to him, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, for many, many years. I honestly can say there was no difference, at least externally, to the way he davened Shemona Esrei on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, to the way he davened the rest of the year. We all go quite frantic with our Shemona Esreis, shuckling like a lulav, sidurim and machzorim over our face. We have a lot to make up for what we didn't do the rest of the year. So we look very athletic, and all sorts of aerobics take place in the way we daven on Yom Kippur. For his Yom Kippur davening, at least externally, there was no difference. Because when you do what you're supposed to do at every moment, so you do what you're supposed to do now as well. It wasn't that he wasn't concentrating and doing what he had to do every morning. And if he could do it in the best possible way, he did. If the best possible time to daven Shachris is Nates, all his life he davened Nates. And if on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, he finished the Nates minyan, and instead of making a left from the Lederman Shul up to his house, he went straight right to the fruit trees, because now it's Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And we start making a bracha on the trees. Let's do it at the first possible moment. Zrizim makdim in the mitzvahs. All b'menuchas hanefesh. No nervin, no tense, external frantic behavior in anything that he was doing. It was all, what does Hashem want from me now? What is the Ratzon Hashem at this given moment? And at each time, he would ask himself, how can I do this in the best possible way? What's the best way to learn? What's the best way to shake lulav? And everything with an incredible seder. These are all madregas we can learn from, at least in our world. The world of his seder. Everything had a seder. Everything had a time and a place. So if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing now, I can do it calmly. And he did. So now it's Shachris. I never remember him catching up on Daf Yomi during Shachris. He didn't need to, because he'd done his 8 pages of Gemara before Nates every single day, calmly, happily. And this absolute menuchas hanefesh was so apparent on him, because he was always doing calmly what Hashem wants from him now. And if it's now time to open the doors and let hundreds and hundreds of people stream into the house or up the staircase to get brachas, that's what Hashem wants from me now. And he did that calmly. It's astonishing. When you think about the weather conditions here in Bnei Brak, it's difficult in the summer for anybody to be calm. I mean, the heat sometimes here is, I'm not quite sure what the weather is like in Jacksonville, but here in Bnei Brak, the heat is extreme in the summer. One of the jokes they say about Bnei Brak is that it reminds people in the summer of the Swiss Alps, because both of them are breathtaking. And he would sit outside for hours, calmly, every person in the blazing heat of really humidity, every person calmly getting their buha or a bracha, whatever it might be. And each thing had its moment, each thing had its time. And if now the time is designated for me to answer letters to Klal Yisrael, which he had tens and tens and tens of on a daily basis, so that's what he's going to do now. That's what Hashem wants from me, and that's what he's going to do. He's now going to answer letters. And he'll do that as well in the best possible way. How do you answer letters in the best possible way? Well, if your name is Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, Zecher Tzadik V'Bracha, so you see all the letters together, and before he even opened those letters or got someone with him to open those letters, he would make sure they look at the back to see who sent the letter. And if by any chance their name is Cohen, they are to be answered first. The Kidashto is a Cohen. If it's a Levi, second. If it's a Yisrael, third. Who would even think of such a thing? But if all your life you're thinking, what is the best possible way to do this? Now is my calling to answer letters. What could possibly be the correct, most best way of doing so? And he would answer the Kohanim first, Leviim second, and Yisraelim third. Everything b'menuchas hanefesh. And he embodied the Torah, everything he saw through the lenses of the Torah. And I think this famous story that I'm sure you might have heard it, just in case you haven't, there's a famous story which even his own Rebbetzin testifies to, that when he was about to bring out a sefer, and a part of the sefer was dealing with certain types of grasshoppers, a chagav, which is kosher.
Yes.
And famously, this chagav, this grasshopper, which is kosher, Reb Chaim wanted to see it and understand what it looks like before he publishes the sefer. And he was very upset that he didn't have the information of what exactly it looks like. And he was mitzvah, his Rebbetzin testifies, he was upset about it. And she testifies, I saw her actually telling over the story. She testifies that on the Friday night meal, in the middle of the meal, all of a sudden, this rare type of grasshopper flew through the window, landed on their table, on the Shabbos table. And Reb Chaim Zatzal looked at it, inspected it, saw whatever he wanted, and it flew back out. And I think it would be a mistake to define the story as a miracle. I truly believe this is the kind of story that someone who cares about every word of Torah gets that kind of siyata d'shmaya. The grandchildren of Rashi, for example, testify that when in Parshas Tetzaveh, Rashi describes the ephod, the apron of the Cohen Gadol. You'll notice in Rashi, he says there, it is similar to the kind of apron that noble women who ride horses wear. That's what Rashi says. You'll see it in Parshas Tetzaveh. Since when did Rashi notice what noble women that ride horses wear? But his grandchildren testify that Rashi was learning in his house. He suddenly heard a commotion outside, and he came to the window and noticed noblemen and noble women riding horses. And it bothered him that he noticed the noble women. But on reflection, he noticed that she was wearing a rare type of apron, which was strapped at the back in quite a unique way. And he understood that Min HaShamayim, it was being shown to him. And although, as he writes, I never heard and I never saw anyone explain exactly what the ephod, but libi oimeli, says Rashi, that it looks like the apron that noble women that ride horses wear. Now, if your name is Rashi and you care about every word and detail of Torah, and you will translate rare birds and rare materials and whatever it might be, every one of them throughout Tanakh and Bavli into French, it's Torah. If it's Torah, I need to understand it. So then you get that kind of siyata d'shmaya. If every single detail is so important to you that you can't continue without understanding it, so you will have a rare grasshopper flying in the house and landing on your table in the middle of Shabbos. I think it's simply the siyata d'shmaya that comes to someone who cares about every single word of Torah, who has such incredible kavod haTorah. And once again, that's something we can touch upon, the kavod haTorah. I remember many times, not once and not twice, noticing how Reb Chaim would get up from his seat in the Lederman Shul, and if he would notice a sefer on the bima that was on the bima slightly crooked, it wasn't straight, he would get up from his seat, walk over to the bima, and put it straight. He would not sit, I'm sitting now with my back to the Sfarim. Reb Chaim Zatzal would not sit with his back to the Sfarim. Whenever he possibly could, again, in a room where you're completely surrounded by Sfarim, but if there was ever a possibility to move his chair away from having his back to Sfarim, again, I want to try and look choshev, so I've got a nice set of Sfarim behind me, and it's a good background for the speech. But he wouldn't dream of doing such a thing. He would not have his back to Sfarim. So when you don't have your back to Sfarim, because you have such kavod haTorah, and you'll get off your seat to move a sefer that's slightly in a diagonal position, you're going to get a grasshopper coming through your front room window and landing on your dining room table. Because every word of Torah, the kavod haTorah, is so tremendous. His whole mahus his whole essence was directed by the Torah. We have a dogma, an example of someone who we know there are Ramache Varim, Shasa Gidim, 248 limbs, 365 sinews, that each one corresponding to the Torah, and on a deeper level, someone can really be so connected to all that. Famously, when he had a stroke about 10 or so years ago, so he lost movement in one hand, and after about 6 weeks, the physiotherapist gave him an empty piece of paper to practice writing once again. And The physiotherapist gave him a pen, and slowly, slowly, he wrote the words on this empty piece of paper, Yakum Purkon Min Shemaya. The salvation comes from heaven. And the physiotherapist was beside himself. As I've been in this business, I've been treating hundreds of patients. You're the first patient, when I gave him an empty piece of paper, didn't sign his name. You sign your name. That's what you do if you want to practice writing something. But he smiles at him and says, sign my name. The Gemara, and he quotes exactly where it is, clearly says, you should never sign your name on an empty piece of paper, because somebody could come in on top and write, you owe me $1,000, and there goes your salary. Every action and reaction of his was guided by the Torah, by the chashivas of the Torah. So as I say, when we talk about the incredible Torah of his, the amount he learned, the hasmada, it's very hard to touch upon all that. Again, obviously, everyone should be mischazik in all these inyanim. But the kavod HaTorah aspect, when you have kavod for something, then it becomes something that you do properly. It's interesting, this foreign points out, the first halacha in Hilchas Shabbos, and Chelik Gimel of the Mishabura, is Hilchas Kavod HaShabbos. If you have kavod for the thing, then the rest goes easier. The rest is easier to connect to. So in this Masechta called Masechtas Reb Chaim Kanievsky, there's many chapters about his Torah, about his Kavod HaTorah. And obviously there'll be chapters about his Avas Yisrael, his astonishing patience, his care for every neshama. How many thousands and tens of thousands of non-religious people climbed those steps in 23 Rashbam? And they felt, here is someone who really cares about me. What difference does it make to him if I keep Shabbos? What difference does it make to him if I wear a yarmulke or not? What difference does it make to him if I learn Torah? But you felt that this person actually really cares. Why is he telling me this? He's not going to make money from it. Apparently, he really cares about my Olam Haba. That's the true ultimate concern that a person felt. Even a non-religious person would feel. One of the most moving sights that we saw, my children always remember this, was Rosh Hashanah, the Haftarah of Rosh Hashanah. Eschatoya ani mazke hayom. I was not looking into the machzah, reading the Haftarah of Chana and Penina throughout the years that I davened in the Lederman Shul. I was looking at the Aliyah that Reb Chaim had and the Balkera reading the Haftarah. It was an astonishing thing. My children all remember this. He would burst into tears every single time. When I say burst into tears, I mean burst into tears. The Balkera himself, I wouldn't even say he read the Haftarah, he cried the Haftarah of Shmuel Aleph Perek Aleph. And when it came to Chana crying in the Mishkan and wanting children and all that, Reb Chaim was next to him and he would burst into tears. Because who knows more than him how many people are desperate for children, how many people are struggling with their children. And as is actually brought down in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, this is actually a skula for someone to say on Leil Shabbos, to go through the first perek, the Haftarah of Rosh Hashanah, when a woman likes candles. It's a skula to help her have children, to have nachas from her children. And he cried the tears of Klal Yisrael. And you saw the incredible care. They're going around the whole world, the whole place, everywhere. He would sit Rosh Hashanah for hours on end to give brachas, or in fact, he looked at it as receiving brachas, but he would so patiently care about every single person. Being a sandik every day of his life for decades, giving simcha to so many couples that he was the sandik, giving haircuts to children, or cutting hair, should I say. All this was astonishing to watch. And when it came to really a serious problem, There was no buhas, 3-second answers. I remember on one occasion, a student of mine, her brother, unfortunately had cancer in the leg, and his family and him flew from America to Bnei Brak to present the question to Reb Chaim. Again, we should rip our clothing just for that. Who has the shoulders? I'm moving down from the head now to the shoulders. Who had the shoulders to answer those impossible questions? The kind of question that stumps anybody. I can't answer it. How am I supposed to answer such a question? How many questions that no one could answer ended up in his court? And here was one of them. There's no question the doctors all agreed the leg had to be amputated all the way up. There was a machloikus amongst the doctors, a difference of opinion, how much of the leg, leolenu, needed to be removed. There were those that said a little bit less, others felt it was too risky, you have to cut more. And apparently, leolenu, every millimeter makes a difference. And who knows, how can you answer such a question? So I was with him when he went to Reb Chaim, and Reb Chaim gave him all the attention in the world and all the ava and all the focus. This is a big question. He asked a few questions, and here come the massive shoulders. Cut less, take the risk. But he said, it's not a risk. You should do this. And he fascinatingly quoted a Yerushalmi that basically says a leg for a leg. Learn something to do with the regel in Torah, and that should be a schus for your regel. And this bacha took what would some doctors say a more risky operation, cut less, and he wrote a choveres, a little booklet on Hilchas Sholosh Regolim, Aliyah LaRegel, to do with the regel. Baruch Hashem, the operation was successful, although his leg was amputated. But Baruch Hashem, it didn't spread further in the leg. A year later, unfortunately, it spread to his lungs. And once again, he flew in, this time, unfortunately, without a leg. And I went with him to Reb Chaim Zatzal. And again, this is a pachad. This is terrifying. And once again, all the ava, all the encouragement. And he blessed him from the depths of his heart. And he told him, Emet Hashem, you're going to get married. But in the interim, it spread to your lungs. You should learn Hilchas Treifus. You should learn the sugyas in the Gemara in Chulin that deals with punctured lungs, with the animal, the world of the lungs, the Torah associated with lungs. I know someone, unfortunately, his wife has leukemia, lo aleinu, and Reb Chaim told him to learn halachas relevant to dam and Yeridea. One for the other. Again, by him, the Koyach HaTorah is what's Koveya. The Torah is Koveya things. Baruch Hashem, I'm glad to tell you the Bacha Baruch Hashem had a refuah and got better, and Baruch Hashem is married with a child today. And each person with the incredible, incredible ava that was so expressed. A friend of mine living around the corner here from England originally, his mother, Leah Sholem, was a Holocaust survivor. She was in Auschwitz. She literally, besides losing her entire family in Auschwitz, was physically ill ever since and never slept a single full night ever since 1944. And in recent years, as she was aging, she used to ask all her questions to Reb Chaim Zatzal from England. And she sent her son a question, quite a moving one. She sent him the question that, I'm aging, and I want you to go and ask Reb Chaim the following question. When I was in Auschwitz, I saw all the horrors. I went through so much. But the only way I survived emotionally and mentally is because I kept on repeating the words of V'chol zois shimcha lo shachachnu, no al tishkachenu. V'chol zois shimcha lo shachachnu, no al tishkachenu. And with all this, we never forgot your name. Please never forget us. And that's what kept me going throughout those difficult years. And Baruch Hashem, it saved me from Gehenna. My dear son, you know I'm aging, and the day is going to come, I'm going to depart from this world. I want you to go to ask Reb Chaim Zatzal if I can have that pasuk, that phrase, written properly and placed in my hand when I'm buried, because I'm scared of going to Gehenna. And it saved me once from Gehenna. I want to make sure that I get saved again from Gehenna. My friend went to Reb Chaim to ask him this question. Reb Chaim was moved. He first said, "The Eibishter darf nicht haben kan zettel." Hashem doesn't need these. He knows who you are. You don't have to worry. And then with his incredible Bekias, he instantly went through the entire Tanakh in a few moments and established it's not a pasuk. Had it been a pasuk, it might be more problematic if it decays or gets decomposed in the ground. It's not a pasuk. It comes from Sheni v'Chamishi when we say the Tachanun on Sheni v'Chamishi. She can do it if she wants. And she chose to do it. And in fact, she, if I can find I actually have here, I can show you. This is an original copy of the very words of the Cholzois Shimcha Loisha Chachnu Noal Tishkochenu that she had written by a sefer. And about 1.5 years ago, she was Niftera, she passed away. Her son ran quickly to Reb Chaim just before the Levaya and asked him whether or not it's still to confirm it's okay to do so. And Reb Chaim burst into tears and in no uncertain terms said she's going straight to Gan Eden, but if she really wants to do so, and she asked to do that, so do that. And that is what happens. And I feel, and with this I conclude, that Reb Chaim Zatzal lived an entire life, a long life, an incredible, incredible productive life. And we're only getting to learn this Masechta more and more as time goes on. And again, there's so much of it we don't know. But he lived a life of V'chol Zois Shimcha Lo Shachachnu. And we all left behind in the forest. Our tefillah is that in his chus, no al tishkochenu. That in his chus, even though we're still in the forest and the candle's gone out, but we should, each one of us, try and rekindle that candle and make our way all the way through. And that can be with any little thing we can try and take on. Each one of the chapters of this incredible Masechta, each one of us to be mischazik. I'm not preaching here, I'm talking to myself like I'm talking to everyone else. This one can work a bit, learning harder, a bit more hasmada. His Shabbos was spectacular. His covered Shabbos, his covered for Svarim. Shabbos by him was so choshev. It was one of the happiest days of his life here in Bnei Brak when he heard that the water system, the whole water is without any chil Shabbos behind it. Actually, when we all ran over there on Friday, when we heard the shocking news, hundreds and hundreds of people ran to the house to say Kapitel Tilim. We couldn't believe it. Everyone was so dumbstruck he was taken. And hundreds of people were gathering Erev Shabbos by his house. And then his son-in-law of Kanievsky came out and mounted the stairs of Lederman and turned to everyone and said, Rabbi Sai, you all know how precious Shabbos was to my father-in-law. I guarantee you he would want you all to go home and not come kicking and screaming into Shabbos. And everyone just walked home. They knew he was right. And throughout the Shabbos afterwards, there was a security firm guarding the house before thousands of people burst in. An Arab security firm. Jews should be Mechal Shabbos, wouldn't come into question. And they say one of the reasons the Levaya was not a Matzah Shabbos is because there would be so much Chil Shabbos on Shabbos preparing for the Levaya. Shabbos was so holy to him. Eretz Yisrael was so precious to him. Each part of this incredible Masechta, if we can take one thing and try and improve it, and try and somehow or other rekindle that candle that went out in the forest to help us get out of the forest. And I conclude, as we unfortunately are left behind at this Seal Masechta, all we can finish off and say is, as we say at the end of every Masechta, Hadron Aloch Masechta, whatever it is, we should return to that Masechta. Daiton Aloch, our mind is on that Masechta. Loisis nashi minoch, we should never forget this Masechta. Yivamas, whatever Masechta it is. So I conclude with our tefillah. Hadron aloch Masechta Reb Chaim Kanievsky. V'data chalon, our mind should be on his lessons and not lose focus of them. Loisis nashi minoch, we never forget those incredible lessons of this Masechta. And in Mitzvah Shem, we should be zoicha that Yiskadal v'Yiskada Shmei Rabbi should somehow, between all of us, come forth and somehow or other rekindle the light. And the Mitzvah Shem help us get out of the forest and reunite with him. And the Mitzvah Shem go forward to Mashiach Tzidkenu. And I conclude with the words of an old Polish Jew who met his friend on Erev Chanukah. And he said, you should have a lichtige Chanukah and a freilichen Purim and a kosher Pesach and a milchige Shavuos. The main thing is we should all be zeicha to a fleishige Tisha B'Av. Thank you for the opportunity, and we should only share good news.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Cohen, and thank you again, everyone who joined us today. This is a very, very meaningful experience for us, and we hope to all try to be mischazik and, whatever we can to take us something, a mashu shebemashu of the greatness of Chaim. So thank you again, Rabbi Cohen, for your time.
Yes, Shkoyach, thank you. All the best. Thank you very much.